I've always been drawn to quiet places, the kind where the wind whispers through the trees and the world feels like it's holding its breath. That's why last summer I decided to rent a cabin in the woods up north, somewhere off the grid, away from the hum of cities and the endless scroll of screens. It was just me, a duffel bag of clothes, a notebook, and the vague hope of writing something worth reading. I didn't know then that I'd stumble into a story I'd never want to tell. The cabin was old, weathered pine with a sagging porch and windows that rattled in the slightest breeze. It sat at the edge of a dense forest, the kind where the trees grow so close they choke out the light. The nearest town was 30 miles away, a speck called Harrow's End that smelled of diesel and desperation. The realtor, a wiry man named Cal with a smoker's rasp, handed me the keys and warned me not to wander too far into the woods. "Folks get lost out there," he said, his eyes darting to the tree line, "and some don't come back right." I laughed it off. I figured he was just spinning yarns for the city fool who thought he could play hermit. The first few days were peaceful. I'd wake with the sun, brew coffee on a rusty stove, and sit on the porch listening to the birds. At night, I'd write by lantern light, the scratch of my pen the only sound breaking the stillness. The forest was alive but distant, owls hooting, branches creaking, the occasional rustle of something small darting through the underbrush. It felt like I'd found exactly what I was looking for. Then, on the fifth night, I heard it. It started as a low hum, so faint I thought it was the wind at first. I was sitting at the table, scribbling in my notebook, when the sound crept into my awareness. It wasn't coming from outside, it was under me, vibrating through the floorboards. I set my pen down and pressed my ear to the wood. The hum grew sharper, almost rhythmic, like a heartbeat pulsing through the earth. I told myself it was pipes or an underground stream, but the cabin didn't have plumbing beyond a hand pump outside. I grabbed a flashlight and checked the crawl space beneath the porch. Nothing but dirt and cobwebs. The sound stopped as suddenly as it began, leaving me crouched there, heart pounding, feeling like an idiot. The next morning, I found the first mark. It was scratched into the porch railing, a jagged spiral, deep enough that it must have taken a knife or claw to carve it. I ran my fingers over it, the wood splintered and rough. I hadn't heard anything out there the night before, no footsteps, no scraping. I chalked it up to an animal, maybe a bear marking its territory, though the shape was too deliberate, too precise. I spent the day exploring the woods, telling myself I wasn't spooked, just curious. The trees stretched endlessly, their trunks gnarled and moss-covered, the ground soft with pine needles. I found nothing. No tracks, no signs of life beyond the occasional squirrel. But the air felt heavier the deeper I went, like it was pressing down on me. That night, the hum returned, louder this time, insistent. It rattled the windows and buzzed in my skull. I couldn't sleep, couldn't think. I paced the cabin, the lantern casting jittery shadows on the walls. Around midnight, I heard something else, a faint tapping like fingernails on glass. It was coming from the window above the sink. I grabbed the flashlight and shone it outside. The beam caught a glimpse of movement, something pale and thin, darting out of sight. My stomach lurched. I told myself it was a deer or a fox, but I locked the door anyway, something I hadn't bothered to do since I arrived. By morning, there were more marks, spirals, dozens of them, etched into the porch, the door frame, even the siding of the cabin. They varied in size, some small as a dime, others sprawling across entire planks. I stared at them, my breath shallow, trying to make sense of it. I wasn't imagining this. Something, or someone, was out there, and it wasn't an animal. I packed my bag, ready to drive back to Harrow's End and demand answers from Cal. But when I turned the key in the truck, the engine sputtered and died. I popped the hood. The battery cables were severed, sliced clean through. I hadn't heard a thing. Panic clawed at me, but I forced it down. I had a satellite phone, spotty service, but it worked. I called Cal. The line crackled, his voice cutting in and out. "You see the marks yet?" he asked, like he'd been expecting this. I told him about the spirals, the hum, the thing at the window. He went quiet for so long I thought the call dropped. Then he said, "Get out. Don't wait. Walk if you have to. It's awake now." Before I could ask what was, the line went dead. I tried calling back. Nothing. I didn't want to walk 30 miles through those woods. Not with whatever was out there, but staying felt worse. I grabbed my bag, a kitchen knife, and the flashlight, and set out along the dirt road. The forest loomed on either side, silent except for the crunch of my boots. I'd gone maybe a mile when I noticed the air growing colder, the trees thinning. Ahead, the road bent sharply, and beyond it was a clearing I hadn't seen on the drive in. In the center stood a stone well, ancient and crumbling, its mouth gaping like a wound in the earth. The spirals were carved into its rim, hundreds of them, worn smooth by time. I should have turned back. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but I stepped closer, drawn by something I couldn't name. The hum was there again, louder, pouring up from the well. I shone the flashlight down. The beam didn't reach the bottom, just darkness, endless and thick. Then I heard the tapping again, faint but growing, echoing up from below. I backed away, my heart hammering, and that's when I saw it. It climbed out of the well, slow and deliberate, its limbs long and spindly, its body pale as bone. It had no face, just a smooth expanse where eyes and mouth should have been, but I felt it watching me. The tapping was its fingers, clawing at the stone as it pulled itself free. I ran, branches tearing at my clothes, the hum chasing me like a swarm of bees. I don't know how long I stumbled through the woods, but I didn't stop until I collapsed on the cabin's porch, gasping, the knife still clutched in my hand. The thing didn't follow me, at least not right away. I barricaded the door with the table, wedged chairs under the windows, and sat there waiting for dawn. The hum never stopped, and neither did the tapping. It moved around the cabin, circling, testing. Sometimes it scratched at the walls, leaving more spirals I could hear being carved. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. When the sun rose, I made a plan. I'd hike to Harrow's End, no matter how long it took. I left at first light, sticking to the road, glancing over my shoulder every few steps. The forest was silent, unnaturally so. No birds, no wind. I'd been walking for hours when I saw the well again. It was impossible. I'd gone in a straight line away from the clearing, but there it was, sitting in the middle of the road, the spirals gleaming wetly in the sunlight. I froze. The hum surged, and the tapping started, louder, faster. I turned and ran the other way, back toward the cabin, my lungs burning. The cabin was still there, but the door hung off its hinges, the windows shattered. Inside, the walls were covered in spirals, floor to ceiling, some still dripping with something dark and slick. My bag was gone. The knife was gone. I heard the tapping behind me and spun around. The thing stood in the doorway, its faceless head tilted, its fingers drumming against the frame. I bolted past it, out the back and into the woods. I don't know how I made it to Harrow's End. Days blurred together, running, hiding, the hum always in my ears. When I staggered into town, filthy and half mad, the locals stared. I found Cal at the gas station, smoking behind the counter. He didn't look surprised. "You saw it," he said, not a question. I demanded to know what it was. He stubbed out his cigarette and sighed. "Old thing, older than the trees. Lives under the ground, in the hollows. Been there since before folks settled here. Usually sleeps, but sometimes it wakes up hungry." "Why didn't you warn me?" I shouted. He shrugged. "Would you have believed me?" He offered me a ride out of town, said I was lucky to be alive. I took it. I didn't look back. That was 8 months ago. I'm back in the city now, surrounded by noise and people, but I don't sleep much. The hum follows me, faint, but always there, buzzing in the quiet moments. Last week, I found a spiral scratched into my apartment door. Small, barely noticeable, but it's growing. Every morning, it's a little deeper, a little wider. I hear the tapping at night, soft against the walls. I don't know what it wants. I don't know why it chose me, but I know it's not done. It's awake now, and it's coming.